Welcome to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast with Tom Rosenbauer, bringing you tips, tricks, and techniques to help you get the most from your time on the water. Here's acclaimed fly fishing author and lifelong fly fishing enthusiast, Tom Rosenbauer.
Hi, and welcome to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast. My good friend Tom Murray of Bozeman, Montana, sent in what I thought was a great suggestion for a podcast topic, and that's what to do for your first time in a driftboat or a flats boat, or your first time fishing with a guide in a boat. First thing you want to be aware of is that your guide is not your servant. You and your guide are a team, and you'll have more fun, you'll get more out of the day if you treat the guide like a member of a team and not as your servant. A lot of guides and clients eventually establish really wonderful relationships and go to each other's weddings and watch each other's kids grow up and visit each other on vacations. So it can be a wonderful, wonderful experience. If you treat your guide like a servant, that's what you're going to get. And that certainly isn't what most of us are looking for when we fish with a guide. So let's talk about drift boats. What do you do the first time you step into a drift boat? First thing you should do is look at your shoes. If you have studded metal studs or cleats on your waders, you need to stop immediately and take them off, find another pair of waders. In fact, you should never arrive for a float trip with metal studs on your waders, because guides are very, very careful about maintaining their boats, and studs just tear up the bottom of the boat, and it's a really rude thing to do. So make sure you don't arrive with studded soles on your waders, or you're going to have to take them off. The next thing you want to do is let the guide know, let him or her know what you want to do for your day. Now, most good guides will ask you, even the day before, or weeks before, or months before, but certainly when you first get into the boat, what do you want to do today? Do you want to try to catch a lot of fish? Do you want to go for a big fish? Do you want to fish dries, nymphs, streamers? Do you want to stop early for lunch, and so on? If your guide doesn't ask you that question, let him know in a polite way. Say, I'd really like to fish dry flies today, if at all possible. And the guide might say, well, it's not the best dry fly fishing today. You can try dries, and maybe we can fish nymphs or streamers a little later, but you can start out with dries. So let the guide know what your expectations are and what you want to do. If you really want to watch birds and not concentrate as much on the fishing, let the guide know that, so the guide can put you in the right position to see birds along the bank of the river. Something that I'm really bad at is to do exactly what a guide says. I like to tie my own flies, and I like to experiment with flies, and I get in a boat with a guide, and the guide suggests a fly, and of course I immediately ignore him and put on what I think is going to work, or some new experiment that I've tied up. And it really drives some guides nuts. In fact, there are a couple of guides that play a game with me year after year to try to get me to use their flies or use a different fly other than my own. And what I'd suggest, and what I've finally in my old age have come to realize, is that I really should, and you really should, do exactly what the guide says as far as fishing technique and flies, at least for the first part of the trip. If you want to experiment later, great. Do what the guide says, catch some fish, make the guide happy, because guides really love it when you catch fish. They want you to catch fish. They get as excited as most clients when a fish is caught. So do exactly what the guide says for the first half of the trip, and then at lunchtime maybe say, I'd like to experiment with my own flies, or do you think I could try a two-handed rod today, or a switch rod, or something like that. Another thing to be cognizant of is if you need a bathroom break at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, make sure you let the guide know that, so that the guide can plan for a good pull-off area along the river. There's nothing worse than having a call of nature and being out in the middle of a flat plain with absolutely no trees or bushes to hide yourself. So let the guide know if you have any special concerns like that before you start the trip, so that they can plan to be in the right place at the right time. If you would like an early lunch, you get hungry at 11:30 in the morning and you can't stand it anymore, instead of 1 o'clock, let the guide know that, so that they can, again, plan for a place to pull off and have a nice lunch. When you fish with two people in a drift boat, the person in the stern is responsible for watching the fly lines. Often you'll have two people casting, and if they cast at cross angles to each other, the lines are going to tangle, and that's a pain. The guide often has to stop the boat to tangle the lines, and it just creates a lot of unnecessary work for everyone, and of course loses some of your fishing time. So if you're the person in the stern, not only do you get the worst fishing position, and it's best usually, most people at the middle of the day switch from bow to stern so that each person gets the best fishing for half the day. But if you're the person in the stern, watch the fly line of the person in the bow, because you're responsible and you need to make sure that you don't tangle his or her line. A good guide is going to watch your casting for the first dozen or so casts and see where you're comfortable, and the guide will then position the boat so that your comfortable casting distance is going to reach the perfect spot. And if you watch a good guide very carefully, they'll weave in and out of the current and back and forth to make sure that you're able to put your fly easily at the best spot with your comfortable casting distance. If for any reason you feel like you're having to stretch your cast too long, or you're having to work too hard to make a really short cast, don't be shy about asking the guide to maybe pull the boat a little further from the bank or pull the boat a little closer to the bank, depending on the situation. Really nice gesture when you're fishing with a guide is to ask to help with the boat when the guide's putting in, or help carry the lunch cooler up to the picnic spot for lunch. Or if you can help prepare lunch. Most times the guys are going to say, no, that's all right, I'll get it myself, and they'll be totally happy. But it's just a nice gesture to ask to help out when they're doing something like this. If you're fishing with a spouse, one of the most important things is to avoid at all costs a family argument in the front of a guide. Guides are often called on to be marriage counselors, and they shouldn't have to be. Most of them are pretty good psychologists. But if you and your spouse aren't getting along and you're frustrated with each other on a float fishing trip, try to save it for later. Leave the guide out of it. Try to enjoy your day, and again, don't try to turn your guide into a marriage counselor. And last but not least, on a driftboat trip, a lot of guides depend on tips. Most guides depend on tips. The outfitter takes part of their fee. Gas is expensive these days, and a customary tip is same as a restaurant, 15 to 20% of the total cost of the tip. You're perfectly welcome to go higher than 20% if you've had a fantastic day and the guide's really gone above and beyond. But don't forget that your guide's working really hard for a living and should be compensated fairly. The first time in a saltwater flats boat, footwear, again, is a thing that I think really makes a nice impression on a guide. Flats boats are mostly white, and dark soles mark them up. And again, guides take a lot of pride in the way their boat looks. So one of the first things that you can do is to remove your shoes before you get on a flats boat. You're probably better off fishing with bare feet anyways, because your feet can feel when the line's tangled around them, as opposed to wearing a pair of shoes where you really can't feel the line. With lots of sunscreen on your feet, take them off. If you do want to wear shoes in a flats boat, make sure that they're non-marking soles, boat shoes or Crocs or something like that. Your guide will appreciate that. A lot of problems arise between a guide and client regarding directions and distance. I was fishing in the Bahamas a number of years ago with a guide, and he kept saying bonefish 60 feet, bonefish 60 feet. I made a cast of about 30 feet, and I said, is that 60 feet? And he said, yeah. So the guide, from a different perspective, standing on a polling platform in the bow of the boat, may have a different perception of distance. You may be thinking a 30-foot cast is just the end of your fly line. The guide might be thinking it's a line plus a leader, or one of you may just not have a good perception of distance. So establish that distance very early on, so that when a guide says bonefish at 45 feet, you both know where 45 feet is. Of course, the other issue is direction, and most guides use the hands of the clock so that 12 o'clock is straight ahead, 3 o'clock is 90 degrees. Last time I was down in the Bahamas, there was a very clever guide that actually painted the hands of a clock around the bow of his boat, so those of us who can't tell time can look down and have a reference point. Final thing you can do, especially when saltwater fly fishing, whether it's for bonefish or permit or tarpon or striped bass, is to practice your casting before you go. There's nothing that's more frustrating for you and for a guide when you can't make a 40-foot cast into the wind. As I said before, guides love to see you catch fish. They enjoy it as much as you do, and there's nothing a guide likes better than to have a good caster in the boat and one that can follow directions. So don't show up in a flats boat when you haven't picked up a fly rod in 12 months. Spend some time practicing casting. Both you and the guide will have a much better day, and everybody will be happy. So that's our podcast for this week. If you have any suggestions, like Tom Murray did, for future podcasts or something you'd like us to discuss, just drop us an email at podcast@orvis.com. And you can see a list of all the past podcasts at orvis.com/podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast with Tom Rosenbauer. Since 1856, anglers worldwide have counted on Orvis to help them get the most from their time on the water. To learn more and to shop the world's finest fly fishing gear, including the award-winning zero-gravity Helios rod, visit www.orvis.com/podcast.